They laughed when I walked in with my notebook, calling me the maid because I always cleaned up their mess, the coffee stains, the papers, even their bad moods. I smiled and kept quiet. Let them think what they want. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just wiping tables. I was watching, learning, and waiting. Waiting for the day when my name would be the one printed on the papers they bragged about signing. And when that day came, I didn't need to say a word. I just signed mine in front of them. It's funny how people only respect you after they realize who you really are. Stay with me. This one's not about revenge. It's about knowing your worth long before anyone else does. Asterisk, she never really planned on ending up there. The office wasn't part of some grand dream or lifelong ambition. It was just a job she took because rent was due and bills didn't care about pride. Her name was Alina, 28, with that kind of quiet patience that people mistake for weakness. She showed up early, stayed late, and never complained when someone asked her to grab coffee or tidy up after a meeting. The others hardly noticed her beyond those small favors. They'd toss their cups in the trash and thank her without looking up. Their voices polite but distant, the kind used for someone they'd forget by lunchtime. She didn't take it personally. That kind of disregard had followed her for years, and she'd learned to let it pass through her without leaving a mark. The company itself wasn't glamorous, just a small real estate firm tucked between two larger, louder buildings downtown. Its walls were covered in motivational quotes about growth and success, though most of the people working there didn't seem to believe in them. They were ambitious, sure, but also insecure. You could feel it in the way they bragged during lunch or dropped big words in meetings they didn't understand. Alina kept her head down, taking notes quietly when no one thought she was listening. What they didn't know was that her old life, the one she rarely talked about, involved far more responsibility than any of them imagined. Before this, she'd helped her cousin manage property sales back home, learning how contracts worked, how timing shaped opportunity, how money could make people kinder or crueler depending on who held it at work. She watched patterns repeat themselves. The senior agents took credit for ideas that weren't theirs. The assistants whispered about bonuses that never came. The owner, a man who loved to be seen as self-made, spent more time polishing his image than his company's balance sheet. Alina understood that kind of man, charming in public, careless in private, always needing someone else to quietly fix what he broke. That's why when numbers started slipping and deals began falling apart, she noticed long before anyone said it out loud. The company was bleeding, not dramatically, but steadily, and while the others blamed the market or bad luck, she saw the truth in the paperwork she organized every day. Still, she kept her routine. Mornings began with coffee runs and ends with cleaning desks littered with empty cups. She told herself it didn't matter. But some evenings, when the office emptied out and the noise of the city softened outside, she would sit at her desk for a few minutes longer, looking around at the space that wasn't hers yet felt familiar anyway. She thought about the hours she gave away and what they were really worth. Somewhere deep down, she started to realize she'd been learning more than she'd been paid for, learning the gaps, the mistakes, and the opportunities hidden in plain sight. Then one afternoon, she overheard a conversation that shifted everything. Two senior agents were talking near the break room, voices low but careless, assuming she was invisible as usual. They were planning a restructuring, new investors, new contracts, and maybe a sale if things went through. One of them joked about how even the maid will be out of a job soon. They laughed, and Alina smiled politely as she passed, pretending she hadn't heard a word, but inside, something clicked. She realized that what they saw as a downfall could be her opening. From that day on, her quietness took on a new purpose. She started organizing copies of contracts, learning who signed what and when, piecing together how ownership could shift hands if someone had the right information. She didn't steal or cheat. She simply understood what others ignored. The company was desperate for stability, and desperation made people sloppy. They left documents unsigned, deals half-reviewed, details hanging like loose threads. Alina didn't know exactly how yet, but she could feel something was unfolding. And for once, she wasn't just watching, she was preparing. Over the next few weeks, Alina began to notice the tone in the office changing. The laughter that once filled the hallways sounded forced now, stretched thin between anxiety and denial. People whispered more, doors stayed closed longer, and the owner's once confident stride turned slower, heavier. She didn't need anyone to tell her that the company was in trouble. It was written in the unspoken tension that followed every conversation. Late payments, lost clients, calls that ended with polite apologies. It was all unraveling, quietly at first, like a thread pulling free from a sleeve. Alina moved through it all with her same quiet rhythm, carrying folders, taking notes, cleaning coffee stains, pretending not to see the panic around her. But she was paying attention. Every unsigned paper, every delayed approval, every name that appeared on a contract, she tracked it in her mind like pieces of a puzzle. Not because she planned anything yet, but because knowledge gave her something the others didn't have: clarity. While they scrambled to protect their positions, Alina was building understanding, and understanding, she knew, was its own kind of power. She'd stay after hours, sorting through old binders or reorganizing files under the excuse of cleaning. No one questioned it. To them, she was still the woman who made sure everything looked neat for the next morning. But in those quiet evenings, she learned how fragile their control really was. She found duplicate contracts, small inconsistencies, and names that didn't match the signatures beside them. None of it illegal on its own, just careless. But carelessness could become opportunity. Sometimes she'd pause, looking out the large office windows at the city glowing in the distance. She wondered how many people out there worked just as hard, unnoticed, waiting for someone to see what they were capable of. She didn't see herself as ambitious, not in the way the others were. She wasn't chasing status or recognition. What she wanted was something simpler to prove, even if only to herself, that she was more than what people assumed, that she could exist beyond the small box they'd placed her in. Then came the day she found the folder. It was left open on the conference table after a meeting, a stack of papers carelessly scattered across it. Alina had gone in to clean up, as usual, but the header on the top sheet caught her eye: acquisition proposal. She shouldn't have looked, she told herself, but curiosity pulled her closer. The document detailed a plan to sell the company, or what was left of it, to a private investor. The signatures at the bottom were familiar, all except one. The line for the new Konar was blank. Her heart beat faster as she skimmed the pages. The numbers didn't add up. The owner was desperate, ready to trade years of work for a quick payout that barely covered his debts. The investor, whoever they were, would gain full control with one simple signature. Alina put the paper down slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly. She wasn't thinking of betrayal or revenge, just possibility. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the image of that empty line in her mind, the space where a name was supposed to be. It wasn't about stealing. It was about stepping forward, just once, after years of standing behind everyone else. What if she could change her story with one decision? What if she could finally step into a life where people looked her in the eye and saw something other than the maid? The next morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The air in the office felt different, quiet, heavy with endings. The others would come in later, rushing and tired, pretending things were fine. But Alina was calm. She wasn't sure what she was about to do, only that she wouldn't walk away this time. For the first time in years, she felt awake, like every unnoticed moment had led her here. When she reached her desk, she opened her notebook, the same one she carried every day, filled with names, dates, and details she'd memorized over months. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that she wasn't invisible. Enough to remind her that power didn't always come from titles. Sometimes, it came from patience. By the time the others walked in, laughing weakly and complaining about deadlines, Alina had already made her choice. The office buzzed louder that morning, but it wasn't the usual kind of busy. It was the sound of something ending. People rushing around not because they were motivated, but because they were afraid. Boxes started appearing under desks. Files disappeared into briefcases, and everyone acted as if pretending to be productive might somehow keep the walls from caving in. Alina kept her expression neutral as she moved through it all, the same slow and steady rhythm she'd always had. She greeted people softly, nodded when spoken to, and avoided any glance that lingered too long. She didn't want attention. Not yet. On the surface, she was still the woman who kept things tidy, who smiled politely, who faded into the background. But beneath that quiet, a decision had already taken root. Certain, irreversible. Around noon, she overheard the owner in his office, his voice low and tense. He was on the phone with someone, the investor, she guessed. Yes, it'll be signed today, he said, his tone shaky. She'll be here in an hour. Alina felt a spark of nerves run through her chest. So the buyer was a woman. For a brief moment, she wondered who this person was. Someone rich, confident, probably everything Alina had never been allowed to be. Then she stopped herself. None of that mattered. When the clock hit 2, the meeting room filled with quiet tension. Alina had been asked to bring water and arrange the papers, just like she always did. As she set the glasses down, she caught a glimpse of the woman sitting at the table, sleek suit, calm eyes, a pen already in hand. She barely noticed Alina. Most people didn't. The owner fumbled through his papers, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. He looked older that day, smaller somehow. Years of arrogance had faded into fatigue. "Let's just get this done," he said under his breath. The investor leaned forward, her tone clipped. "As soon as the final signature's there, the transfer will be processed." Alina stepped back, folding her hands in front of her, pretending not to listen, but every word settled inside her chest, heavy and deliberate. The signature line stared up from the table again, that same empty space she'd seen before. She could almost feel it waiting, daring her dot. Then came the moment of hesitation. The investor's phone buzzed. She frowned, glanced at the screen, and stood up. "Excuse me, 5 minutes," she said, walking out to take the call. The door closed softly behind her. It was quiet again. Too quiet. The owner sighed, rubbing his temples, and muttered, "5 more minutes of this nightmare." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Alina looked at the papers, then at the pen. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Her heartbeat filled her ears, steady and deliberate. No one was watching. No one cared. The people who laughed at her, ignored her, talked over her, they didn't even notice when she walked into the room, much less what she touched. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. She didn't think, she just moved. One small curve, another line, and then her name, quiet, deliberate, almost beautiful. It was done in seconds. And yet it felt like it had taken her whole life to get to that moment. When the investor returned, she didn't even look twice. She sat, glanced at the papers, saw the signature, and nodded. "Good," she said. "Let's proceed." The rest was just formalities, handshakes, murmured thanks, promises to stay in touch that no one meant. No one noticed. Alina slipped out of the room. She walked down the hall slowly, every step strange and weightless. She wasn't sure if she'd just done something brave or foolish. Maybe both. She didn't know what would happen next, if the papers would hold, if anyone would realize what she'd done. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. Later that day, she sat on a park bench a few blocks from the office, watching people move past her, talking, laughing, living lives that didn't look like hers. The city felt brighter, louder, alive in a way she'd never really noticed. She pulled out her notebook and opened it to a blank page. For years, she'd filled it with other people's needs, reminders, and small details that made their lives easier. This time, she wrote something different. Just one line. "I signed my name." The next morning, she didn't go to the office. She stayed home, made coffee, and waited. By afternoon, the calls started coming. First confusion, then panic, then silence. Someone had finally noticed. She could almost imagine the chaos. The owner shouting, the investor demanding answers, the staff running around trying to fix something they didn't understand. But she didn't pick up the phone. Not yet. She wanted them to sit in that moment, to finally notice the woman they'd ignored. Asterisk. By the time the second day passed, the world she used to orbit had started to unravel. News spread quietly. The sale had gone through, but not the way anyone expected. The documents were legally binding. Her signature fully recognized. The ownership of the property, the company, the assets, all of it now bore her name. Somewhere between disbelief and denial, those who once dismissed her were scrambling to understand how a maid had become the legal owner of everything they thought was theirs. Alina didn't celebrate. She didn't even smile. She sat at her small kitchen table, her phone buzzing nonstop, watching the morning light fall across her notebook. Her hands were still, her mind strangely calm. For years, she had done everything for everyone, cleaned up after their messes, remembered their deadlines, kept the place running without ever being seen. Maybe that's why no one noticed when she started paying attention to the things that really mattered, like the contracts, the fine print, the small mistakes that arrogance always leaves behind. When the first knock came at her door, she already knew who it would be. It was the owner, his face drawn, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. "Alina," he said, trying for politeness that didn't quite reach his eyes. "There's been a misunderstanding. I think you might have signed something by mistake." She looked at him for a long moment, then simply said, "No mistake." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He hesitated, searching her face for weakness, maybe expecting her to fold like she always did. But she didn't. For the first time, He was the one who looked uncertain. When he left, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt earned. The weight of all those years, the whispered jokes, the ignored words, the invisible work started to lift, piece by piece. She realized power didn't always look like shouting or revenge. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, steady, the kind that waited until everyone else had stopped paying attention. Over the next few days, she met with lawyers, not the expensive, suited kind who had always dismissed her questions, but a young woman from a small firm who listened without condescension. Together, they went through the paperwork line by line. Everything was in order, every detail legal. The signature hadn't just changed the ownership, it had shifted the balance. Still, Alina didn't want to destroy anyone. That wasn't her intention. What she wanted was acknowledgement, not an apology, not pity, just recognition of what she had done, what she had endured, and what she now held. When the company's remaining board members asked for a meeting, she agreed. The room looked different this time. The same glass walls, the same long table, but the energy had shifted. People who once avoided eye contact now waited for her to speak. The tension in the air wasn't anger anymore. It was respect, or maybe fear. Either way, it was the first time she truly felt seen. She didn't gloat. She didn't remind them of the names they'd called her. She simply said, "You taught me how this place works. You showed me what people notice and what they don't. I just learned faster than you expected." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, someone nodded. Another looked down, ashamed. The meeting ended quietly, without confrontation. But something in the room had changed, something permanent. When Alina stepped outside afterward, the city felt warmer, like the world had opened up a little. She stopped at a cafe she used to pass every morning but never entered because she thought she didn't belong there. She ordered coffee, took a seat by the window, and watched the afternoon crowd drift by. There was no dramatic ending, no triumphant music in her head, just peace, the kind that came from knowing she had rewritten her own story, one quiet decision at a time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, she opened her notebook again. Beneath the line she had written "Before I signed my name," she added another, and this time, they read it. She closed the notebook, exhaled, and smiled, not because she had won, but because she finally existed on her own terms.